Well, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. You might be surprised that I am wishing you a Merry Christmas when December has ended. Christmas trees are drying out on the curb, and all the presents have disappeared from under the tree. But Christmas is actually a season of 12 days, starting on December 5th and running all the way up until January 6th on Epiphany. You may have heard of the 12 days of Christmas from the famous song. But instead of leaping lords and maids a-milking, the 12 days of Christmas are full of these gripping accounts of the early years of Jesus' life in the Christian tradition. And in all these stories from the early years of Jesus, there is always this shadow of danger, warning, darkness. The silent night we once sang in awe and wonder at the God-made man becomes the hushed silence of a refugee family fleeing in the night to avoid a murderous tyrant hell-bent on destroying their newborn son. The Christmas story is not all brightness and light. When God became a man, it was a little bit more like an invasion, a parachute drop behind enemy lines. Danger was lurking around every corner from the very moment that Jesus was born. When God became fragile, it wasn't long before the forces of evil gathered to try to extinguish his life. Jesus was a hunted man from birth. And this is the story that we hear today. In the church, we call it the slaughter of the holy innocents. This story is often skipped over in our churches and Christmas celebrations. And I have to confess to you, truth in advertising, that I myself have twice chosen to preach on another passage on this Sunday. But during our service planning a month ago, I was convicted that I was skipping over a story that is absolutely central to the message of the gospel. I got to tell you, I'm not eager to preach on this passage. In fact, I have some fear about doing so. But the reason why I'm doing it is this. I am called not just to preach the easy and nice parts of the Bible. That's not my call as a preacher. Because even in the hard parts, even the dark parts, that is where the light of the gospel still shines just as brightly. Even when it looks very dark, that is when the light shines brightly. So buckle up and hang tight. There is light at the end of the tunnel as we dig into this passage together. First, I want to give you some context for this story because it's not one that we often study. When Jesus was born, there was some sort of star or cosmological event in the sky that signaled to the wise men, what we call the Magi, that there was a newborn king of the Jews. Newborn king of the Jews. And so these wise men begin a long journey to bring special gifts to this newborn king, to honor him and to worship him. We don't know how long it takes them to make this journey. We're not quite sure, but we know that it was, because of the timeline that we hear in our story today, we know that it was less than 2 years journeying. So somewhere probably between about 3 months and 2 years is what it took the wise men to make this journey from when they saw that star. So they didn't show up the night that Jesus was born. He wasn't a little infant. He could have even been a toddler. He maybe was starting to walk around. The wise men, when they show up, they first actually go to Jerusalem because they assume, well, there's a king of the Jews, he's going to be in Jerusalem. So that's where they go. They go to Jerusalem, expecting to find the newborn king there in the palace. But when the wise men arrive, they discover that there is no newborn king in the palace in Jerusalem. And so what they find instead is not a newborn king, but King Herod. And the religious scholars in King Herod's court go and check the Bible. Fancy that. They look in the scriptures, and they tell the wise men that the Messiah, the King of the Jews, would be born in Bethlehem. That's what the prophecies say. Now, before Herod lets them go to Bethlehem to find the newborn king, he pulls them aside and he says, "Promise me that as soon as you find this newborn king, you come back and tell me, because I want to go worship him as well." Now, as we discover, worshiping the baby Jesus was the last thing on Herod's mind. He had a much more sinister plan. However, Herod's plan gets thwarted. After the wise men locate the child, Jesus, and worship him, the wise men are warned not to go back to Herod, not to go back to Jerusalem, so they return back to their homeland by a different road. They don't tell Herod. And that's where our passage picks up this morning. Here's what we read, just to remind you again. "Now when the Magi had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' And so Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod." Herod is a smart cookie, and he realizes that the wise men have given him the slip. And so without finding out exactly who is the new king, he doesn't know which child in Bethlehem or that area is the new king. He decides he's going to execute them all. All the children, all the male children, 2 years old and younger in the whole region of Bethlehem. Why would Herod want to kill innocent children? Why would he be so hell-bent on destroying Jesus that he would execute random baby boys in Bethlehem? And what does this story have to tell us about the gospel? My wife and I recently watched the movie Wonder Woman 1984. Has anybody seen that? Has anybody watched it yet? Okay. It's not as good as the first one. It's, like most sequels, it's not as good. But don't worry, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, I promise. But there is one character named Max Lord. That's his name. What a name. Isn't that a great name? Max Lord. And Max Lord is a total charlatan. And you know this right away in the movie. He's a TV personality who tries to get people to invest in his company. That's his whole shtick. If you give me your money, if you invest with me, all of your dreams will come true. Right? We know this type. We've seen them online or on the TV. He sells the power of positive thinking. And he would convincingly ask in his little TV ads, "Don't you want more? Don't you want more?" Of course, Max Lord is nothing but a fraud. He doesn't have a successful business. He's supposed to have this oil business, but he hasn't found any oil with all of the property that they bought. He's a total fraud who's just, taking people's money. Well, in the same way, Max Lord has a lot in common with King Herod. The fundamental flaw of Max Lord and King Herod is that they both were pretending to be more than what they actually were. They were doing this in order to gain power over other people. They want to be great, and they were willing to do anything to be great. The jealousy, envy, and lust for power always turn out to be deadly, both in the fictional world of Wonder Woman and the actual world we live in. King Herod was a fraud. He was not a descendant of David. In fact, he wasn't even an Israelite at all. He was an Edomite by descent. He had absolutely no right to call himself the King of the Jews. His father, however, had become good friends with a guy named Julius Caesar. You ever heard of him? And so because his dad was friends with Julius Caesar, he got the support of the Roman Senate and the considerable support of the Roman army. And so Herod conquered Jerusalem and declared himself to be the king of the Jews. And what he actually was basically a puppet of the Roman Empire. His only real job was to get as much taxation, as much money out of the people of Israel to send back to Rome, to make sure that the flow of money continued uninterrupted. That's what he was there to do. And so King Herod, in his thirst for power, decided that he wanted to be called Herod the Great. Herod the Great, King Herod the Great. And he did all of these building projects. He was this kind of guy that always had something to prove. We know that type, don't we? He always had something to prove. And so he's constantly doing these large, lavish building projects. He built the second temple in Jerusalem, made this huge expansion on the temple. He built a giant fortress. And when he's thinking, what should I name this fortress? What better name than Herodium, after himself? He loved himself. He wanted to be great. He was trying to prove that he really was great. He wanted more, bigger, faster, better. He wanted to be more than he was. And he turned deadly. In fact, Herod went on not just murdering these random baby boys, but he went on to murder his own 3 sons because he was so terrified that they would usurp the throne from him. This led the historian Macrobius to remark, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son." And so we read today that Herod ordered the slaughter of little children in Bethlehem. I want to show you an image on the screen. I hope we have this. Yeah, show you an image. This is a depiction of the slaughter of the Holy Innocents, painted by Léon Cogniet in 1894. And I had Melanie zoom in on the woman's eyes in this. A friend of mine sent me this image this week. And I was just so captivated by the look on her face. You see in her eyes just absolute terror. And she's got her hand over the mouth of her child, trying to keep the baby quiet so that Herod's soldiers won't find them as they hide behind a broken wall. This image is part of the Christmas story. It's not one that we like, it's not one that we're comfortable with, but it's an essential part of our Christmas story. It's what we gloss over, and it's not just in the past, it's what we so easily gloss over today. Herod was an absolute monster, but he was not unusual. He was not strange. Envy and jealousy are just as lethal today as they were 2,000 years ago. When I was in Rwanda, I had the privilege of visiting the Genocide Memorial. And I'll tell you, there were many shocking things in that memorial, but to me, the most shocking was the bloodied clothes of little children, the skulls and skeletons of little babies, little children that had been hacked to death or shot with guns. And all of that massacre that happened in Rwanda was because one tribe wanted to be greater than another tribe. It was envy. It was jealousy. It was lethal. But we don't have to look to some far-flung place on the other side of the world to see the effects of cruelty and wanton disregard for human life, to see the effects of jealousy. It's right here in our backyard. We live in a culture of callousness towards children, towards human life. It's not that long ago that our state authorities were ripping young children out of the arms of their parents at the southern border. Thankfully, Christians spoke out with one voice, and this practice ended. I'm so grateful that it stopped. I'm so grateful that the church was united to say this is wrong. And yet, even though that practice has stopped, we still live in a country where more than 500,000 children are killed by abortion every year. 500,000 children. That should shock us. That should scandalize us. You know, the vast majority of these killings are not for medical reasons or rape or incest for that matter. The vast majority of abortions are elective. They're chosen. Mothers and fathers choosing their life over the lives of their children. Now, I don't say this to condemn anyone. I'm not here to condemn parents who have had abortions. There is grace and forgiveness and mercy for every sin. I know people sometimes face incredible pressures in their life, and they have to make very tough choices. I'm not trying to negate any of that. I'm not here to condemn anyone at all. Don't hear me saying that. But I am here to say that all of us live and breathe in a culture that passively accepts the snuffing out of 500,000 lives every year. That's where we live, brothers and sisters. This is our culture that is doing this. This is not 2,000 years ago. 500,000. They estimate, when we talk about the Feast of the Holy Innocents, they estimate that King Herod killed about 20 to 50 boys. That's horrendous. That's horrific. But we kill 500,000. That should scandalize us. We live in a world where tyrants are still terrorizing little towns like Bethlehem, and families like the Holy Family have to flee in the night to save their children's lives. I've heard the stories. I know people who fled with their children across borders to save their children's lives. We still live in a world where refugees exist, just like Mary and Joseph. We still live in a world where children are killed routinely. We live in a world that is not as it should be. Innocent lives are regularly cut short. Babies die, friends die, spouses die, children die. This year, more than 300,000 Americans have died from COVID. The daily rate is now averaging about 3,000 a day. You know what that's like? That's like every day is 9/11. Every day is 9/11. That's what it's been this past month. We live in a world still ruled by death. Jesus was born into a world that was ruled by death to set us free from the tyranny of death. And it's precisely this world that is ruled over by death, where we look around and want to despair. It is precisely that world that Jesus came to save. It's precisely why he became a little baby in Bethlehem. The real King of the Jews. The real King of the Jews came to his people. Even the state, with all of its power, couldn't thwart the plans of God. The real King of the Jews came to give up his life for the fake King of the Jews. Herod was a fake, a fraudulent King of the Jews. But when Jesus was nailed to the cross, Pilate had a little sign nailed to the cross. Do you know what it said? It said, "The King of the Jews." Now, this really upset the Jewish leaders. And they went to Pilate and they said, "Take that sign off." And Pilate said, do you remember what he said? "What I have written, I have written." Pilate, I don't know that he knew, but Pilate was declaring that this is the King of the Jews. He meant it as a mockery of Jesus, I think. He meant it to mock the Jewish leaders, but it was the truth. And what I want you to know today is that the truth will always prevail. It will always win. The light will always conquer the darkness. Herod thought he could kill the King of the Jews, and that would be the end of the story, and he could remain the King of the Jews. But God thwarted his plan. And even Jesus' time, when it did come at a much later date to die, he was still declared King of the Jews. Not even death could keep back the truth. The fundamental flaw of Herod is the fundamental flaw of all humanity. It is the flaw of Adam and Eve when they ate the forbidden fruit. And as every generation since Adam and Eve has revealed over and over and over again painfully, it's the flaw that we all share. We all want to be more than we are. We have this jealousy and envy where we want to be more than what we are. Now, godly ambition is not wrong. I want to be clear about that. It is not ambition that is the problem. I want you to be ambitious people for Jesus. The problem is when we want to be more than we are instead of striving to be all that God created us to be who we've been created to be. God created King Herod, and he had a purpose that God put him on this earth for, but he didn't step into it. He wanted something different. He wanted to be more than what he was created to do. Envy and jealousy feed a culture of death. That's what causes a culture of death, envy and jealousy. It's not liberals or conservatives. It's not the media. It's not the government. It is jealousy, wanting to be more than we are, better than others, putting others down to boost ourselves up. That's what creates a culture of death, where we start to devalue others and value ourselves above them. That's what starts. That's the root of a culture of death. Envy is in the hearts of each one of us. But I have a solution for you today. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. We've gone through the bad news. Here's the good news. Here's the solution. We can choose today to put ourselves on the side of the refugee family that fled from Bethlehem so long ago. We can grieve the lives lost and work towards a better and brighter tomorrow because we know that the light is coming. It is not going to be stopped. Every Herod will die. That is the promise of Scripture. Every Herod will die, but Jesus lives on. Every lie will eventually fall silent, but the truth will stand forever. Jesus has conquered death. The plans of God will not be thwarted by all the evil plans of men. This year, the world has been set on fire. Our lives have been turned totally upside down from what any of us expected 2020 to be. Death seems to be all around us. When it looks like death is reigning supreme, when it seems like hope is lost, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that God's plans will not be thwarted. His purposes will be accomplished. And even in death, Jesus has gone with us there. Even when we face death, he is there with us. He went into death to be with us there. Death may have its day, but Jesus will have the victory. This is a Christmas hope. This is the light in the gospel. This is what we say to the Herods of the world who push others down to try to boost themselves up. The Herods will all die, but those who trust in the Lord will live forever. That's our Christmas hope. I want to close by reading a poem by Malcolm Wheat called Refugee. It's a beautiful poem. Listen to these words. We think of him as safe beneath the steeple, or cozy in a crib beside the font. But he is with a million displaced people on the long road of weariness and want. For even as we sing our final carol, his family is up and on that road, fleeing the wrath of someone else's quarrel, glancing behind and shouldering their load. Whilst Herod rages still from his dark tower, Christ clings to Mary, fingers tightly curled. The lambs are slaughtered by the men of power, and death squads spread their curse across the world. But every Herod dies and comes alone to stand before the Lamb upon the throne. That's the good news. That's the justice at the end of it all. That, my brothers and sisters, is truth. Amen.